Hello and welcome. I am Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Russia fires drones and ballistic missiles across Ukraine overnight, targeting energy systems and injuring at least 7 people in Kyiv, Dnipro and Odessa. Ukrainian officials say hundreds of weapons disrupt power, heating and water as a massive attack hits buildings in the capital. President Donald Trump says talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu produced no definite agreement on Iran. Netanyahu says Israel's security must be protected and signals no clear US commitment to expand talks beyond Iran's nuclear program. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel joins President Donald Trump's Board of Peace during talks in Washington. Images show Netanyahu signing the accession document after meeting Secretary of State Marco Rubio, confirming Israel's membership. An advisor to Iran's supreme leader says Tehran will not compromise on its missile capabilities amid ongoing talks with the United States. Ali Shamkhani calls the missile program non-negotiable during events marking the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. The US House votes 219 to 211 to reject Donald Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods, with 6 Republicans joining Democrats in a rare rebuke. The measure now moves to a Senate but faces a likely presidential veto if it reaches the White House. The Arab League has urged US President Donald Trump to prevent Israel from annexing parts of the West Bank, calling on Washington to honor its commitments during a session of the Arab League Council in Cairo, while the council reaffirmed support for Palestinian state within the June 4, 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. As President Xi Jinping reinforced the force in a Lunar New Year message, China has deployed a section of its PLA cyberspace force to disputed spatially islands at the South China Sea, as during Xi's address at the Central Military Commission headquarters, images of the cyber unit stationed on the artificial island China calls the Nanshan's war also shown. Libya has granted several foreign companies new oil exploration and production licenses for the first time in 17 years, after more than a decade of political instability, as Libya is seeking to draw major global energy companies back. And for your top story this hour, Federal Border Czar Tom Homan has said that the Trump administration has announced the end of its large-scale immigration enforcement surge in Minnesota. Homan told reporters that the US President Donald Trump approved his request to conclude the operation, known as Operation Metro Surge, and that a significant crackdown of federal immigration agents is already underway and will continue into next week. Let's listen in.
With that, and success that has been made arresting public safety threats and other priorities since this surge operation began, as well as the unprecedented levels of coordination we have obtained from state officials and local law enforcement, I have proposed, and President Trump has concurred, that this surge operation conclude. A significant drawdown has already been underway this week and will continue.
Homan said he will remain in Minnesota temporarily to oversee the withdrawal and ensure its successful completion. The surge, which began in December, deployed thousands of immigration officers to the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and led to more than 4,000 arrests, according to federal authorities. While the administration said it focused on public safety threats, The operation drew strong opposition from local officials and residents. The enforcement effort sparked widespread protests, particularly after 2 US citizens were fatally shot by federal agents during operations this year, intensifying scrutiny of ICE tactics and the role of federal law enforcement in communities. We are now being joined by Raymond Vickery, who's an international affairs expert and former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. Why is the surge ending now? What has changed that led Tom Homan to say that Minnesota immigration operation will conclude?
Well, thanks very much for having me. What's changed is the polls and the reception of the American people to the disastrous invasion, really, of Minneapolis by ICE. The killing of 2 civilians, citizens of the United States, the taking of people breaking into homes without judicial warrants in violation of the Fourth Amendment, the abuse of power on the streets to limit the freedom of speech guaranteed under the First Amendment. All of these things have contributed to very negative results in the polls politically for this operation. As you know, Tom Homan replaced an earlier commandant for ICE in Minneapolis, who was extremely aggressive. Homan himself is no shrinking violet. He was the author of the issue or the program to separate children and parents as a way to discourage illegal immigration. But he is a sounder approach in terms of what the reception is to what's been going on there. So I think that that's the long and short of it. The idea that you were going to sweep in with really a military force and take out all of the people who were not documented to the satisfaction of ICE, it was never an appropriate approach to the illegal immigration problem. And so that is being realized, but it is not really a deviation from the overall policies of President Trump, and the story about ICE and invasion of American cities is not over by any means.
And was the operation successful? Did the federal crackdown achieve its goals, or did it create more problems than it solved, as we saw with the widespread of protests, not just in Minnesota, but across the whole country?
It has obviously created more problems than it has solved. There is widespread approval in the United States and support for having a revision in terms of how we deal with immigration. But there is extremely little support for the approach of that has been taken in this instance.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere, as we will be back with you very shortly. 2 Mexican Navy ships have docked in Havana, Cuba, bringing more than 800 tons of humanitarian aid as the island faces a deepening energy and fuel crisis. According to Mexican officials, the vessels, the Armapalo, Apan and Islama box, arrived with food supplies including milk, rice, beans, powdered milk and hygiene items for Cuban civilians. The shipments come amid US pressure that has cut off oil supplies from key partners like Venezuela and halted fuel deliveries, triggering rationing, power cuts and shortages across the island. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has condemned the impact of US measures and says Mexico will continue diplomatic efforts to restore energy supplies. Cuban authorities have labelled the restrictions as energy blockade and says the crisis is hitting transportation, hospitals and daily life. We are now being joined again by Raymond Vickery. Thank you so much for joining us back here. How might this aid mission affect diplomatic relations between Mexico and Cuba, especially as Cuba faces economic and fuel crisis?
Well, thanks again for allowing me to comment on this. It seems to me that the reaction of Mexico shows the weakness in the Trump administration approach to the Western Hemisphere, and in particular Cuba. As you well know, our Secretary of State, parents came from Cuba, were refugees from Cuba, and his approach to Cuba fits with President Trump's view of the right to hegemony, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. Sort of a revival on steroids of the Monroe Doctrine, which says that nobody else has any right to control or influence the affairs of the Western Hemisphere except the United States. Mexico has not been a supporter of this approach at all, for the obvious reasons. There is a history, of course, of the United States taking Mexican territory, and Mexico wants to be able to assert its own independence and the independence of Mexico from this Don Monroe Doctrine, if you will, proclaimed by President Trump. So what is going on here is the Trump administration, with the impetus of the Secretary of State, trying to reassert control over Cuba, but meeting resistance from other independent nations of the Western Hemisphere.
And does Mexico's actions reflect broader regional efforts to counterbalance US pressure on Cuba, or is it driven mainly by humanitarian concerns?
Well, it is the first, that this is an example of why it is completely inappropriate to try to hearken back to a 19th century doctrine of quasi-empire in the Western Hemisphere. There, of course, are humanitarian aspects to this, because the kind of really embargo which is being put on Cuba creates great humanitarian suffering. So yes, that's part of it, but basically this is a geopolitical move, but is indicative of what is going to happen across Latin America as the Trump administration shifts from one of cooperative approach, the Institute of American States trying to cooperate, to a my way or the highway orientation, which President Trump has shown through his capture of Maduro, blowing boats out of the water when he claims that they are running drugs without any judicial involvement. So make no mistake about it, the actions here are of a geopolitical nature and concern the weakness of this neo-imperialistic approach to the Western Hemisphere.
Thank you so much, Raymond, for joining us here today on NewsX World. The Pentagon has prepared a second aircraft carrier strike group for deployment to the Middle East as the US military braces for potential action against Iran. President Trump indicated that he is considering sending another carrier if negotiations with Iran fail. Although no official deployment order has been given yet, this additional carrier would join the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is already in the region. Furthermore, the USS George H.W. Bush, currently finishing training exercises, is expected to be deployed within 2 weeks, with its training scheduled, possibly accelerated. As we know that in Iran, that after the USS Abraham Lincoln was deployed to the area, it did spark up concerns that there was going to be some strikes and attacks onto Iran, but it never happened, as Iran was also readying up to strike back at the US. Now, as we have just heard that the USS George H.W. Bush is now gearing up to go, we are waiting to hear comments from Iran about this situation. President Trump indicated that he is considering sending this carrier if negotiations again fail with Iran. We know they had talks in Oman about this agreement that they both can't come to. However, if this next set of talks fail, then the USS Although no official deployment order has been given yet, this additional carrier would join the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is already in the region, as we know. The USS George H.W. Bush currently is finishing their training exercises and is expected to be deployed within at least 2 weeks, with its training schedule possibly accelerated. The Pentagon has said that there has not been any clear instructions for it to go ahead. We are joined back with Raymond Vickery. Thank you for joining us back here today on News X World. So the US is now thinking of sending another USS George H.W. Bush to go to Iran. What do you think this could happen? Because could this be a threat that he wants to give Iran, but Iran could just attack back? Or do you think Iran will take this as we need to get these talks moving?
Well, thanks for allowing me to comment on this. It seems to me that the movement of yet another carrier to Iran really is part of a pattern of trying to coerce Iran on both its nuclear program, which, by the way, President Trump had said was obliterated, but obviously is not, and to coerce them on the issue of missiles. Whether or not this will be the prelude to war is not known, because there does not seem to be either an overall strategy or partners or principles upon which to wage peace, which is the ultimate goal, rather than simply treating this as a transaction in which the leaders of Iran and the United States are involved. And like a real estate deal, President Trump will be able to come out with an outcome that he says is a triumph for him. So this is a very disconcerting approach to keep putting more and more firepower into the area around Iran. And what has kept this from coming to a military head at this point, of course, is the fact that it's not just Iran when you talk about waging war around the Persian Gulf, because through the Straits of Hormuz from the Persian Gulf come Saudi Arabian oil, come United Arab Emirates, come Kuwaiti, Iraqi oil. All of those countries will be definitely impacted should there be a commencement of military hostilities. So yes, it's very disconcerting that this ship movement has taken place, as opposed to some sort of peace waging, which would have partners, would have principles, and would have an overall strategy. But that's not the way in which the President Trump administration works. Well, the way in which it seems to work is to thrive on chaos and then hope that everything will turn out in favor of President Trump in the end. The problem with this approach, of course, is miscalculation. Miscalculation which can be set off by Iranian attacks on the forces which are there, or going over the red lines which have been set by Iran. So we do not know this outcome, but it's a very disconcerting development in the whole Iranian situation.
Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. We have some breaking news that's just come in. Another group of Russian and Ukrainian children has been reunited with their families following efforts led by US First Lady Melania Trump, the White House said in a statement. The development marks the third time the First Lady has helped broker such a repetitive initiative amid ongoing tensions between the two countries. While officials did not disclose how many children were involved or when exactly the reunions took place, the White House confirmed that discussions with both Moscow and Kyiv are continuing. The initiative is part of the broader humanitarian efforts aimed at reconnecting displaced children with their families. Next up, CK Hutchinson Holdings, based in Hong Kong, was warned of potential legal action against Denmark's AP Moller Maersk after Panamanian authorities decided to temporarily transfer control of two key Panama Canal ports to the Danish company. This decision follows a ruling by Panama's Supreme Court in January, which declared CK Hutchinson's concession unconstitutional. Despite this, CK Hutchinson, which has operated the port since 1997, disagrees with the ruling and has already stated arbitration proceedings. Furthermore, the company has notified Maersk that any further actions to operate the ports without its agreement will likely result in legal action. The ongoing dispute adds more uncertainty to CK Hutchinson's plans to sell the port amid the broader tensions between the US and China. Got some more breaking news. The Bangladesh Awami League has strongly condemned the national elections held on February the 11th to the 12th, 2026, calling them a well-planned farce conducted without genuine public participation. In a statement dated February the 12th, the party alleged that the polls were carried out illegally and unconstitutionally under the interim leadership of Mahmoud Yunus. Citing Election Commission data showing a turnout of 14.96% by mid-morning, the Awami League claimed the low participation reflected a public boycott of what it described as a voterless election. The party also alleged widespread irregularities, including the seizure of polling stations, intimidation of supporters, and targeting of minority communities in the lead-up to voting day. Additionally, the statement questioned what it called an abnormal increase in voters' numbers, particularly in Dakar, rising concerns over the credibility of electoral rolls. The Awami League has demanded cancellation of the election results, the resignation of the interim leadership, the release of political prisoners, and fresh polls under a neutral caretaker government to restore democratic legitimacy. French President Emmanuel Macron says the European Union is ready to respond quickly to the growing pressure from both the United States and China. Macron told reporters upon arriving at an EU summit in Belgium that the EU is facing increasing pressure, particularly due to unfair competition from China and tariffs imposed by the US. He stressed the EU's priority is to provide a swift response to these challenges. Macron said to achieve this, the EU must boost its competitiveness, focus on energy issues, and strengthen existing partnerships while forming new ones. We are now being joined by Andrew KP Luang, who's an independent China strategist, joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Why is the EU feeling the pressure now, and what actions by the US and China are pushing European leaders to respond quickly?
Well, could you repeat the question a little bit more, because I only received the request without details. So could you just repeat the question?
Sorry, yes. Why is the EU feeling pressure now, and what actions by the US and China are pushing European leaders to respond so quickly?
Respond to what? Because I haven't got any details, because your staff who booked me did not give me any details, not on WhatsApp, so I don't know what the topic was. And I only joined just now without even confirming the time. So can you just tell me what was the subject?
Yeah, of course. I'll repeat it again. French President Emmanuel Macron says the European Union is ready to respond quickly to the growing pressure from both the United States and China. Macron told reporters whilst arriving at the EU summit in Belgium that the EU is facing increasing pressure, particularly due to unfair competition from China and tariffs imposed by the US.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that the reference to both China and the United States cannot be put in the same breath because it was the Trump's administration who lashed out left, right, and center, imposing tariffs and even on its closest allies in the transatlantic relationship, and also threatening to annex Greenland belonging to a NATO member, Denmark. This cannot be put in the same breath with what was perceived to be China's using the economic weight and also threatening the EU's businesses because they are much less competitive with China, for example, on the electric vehicles. But nevertheless, the China's very competitive enterprises are threatening the survival of the European Union key industries. So I think the two cannot be put in the same breath. But nevertheless, the European Union is subject to pressure, both from the Trump administration in terms of tariffs, in terms of predatory aggression, for example, on Greenland. As far as China is concerned, is how to withstand China's very competitive enterprises. So I think that's what what's all about. The two cannot be equated on all fours.
Thank you so much for joining us here today and Last Minute on NewsX World.
All right, thank you.
Morocco has announced a $330 million flood relief plan aimed at supporting residents, farmers and businesses in the country's northwestern plains. The government plans to allocate 1.7 billion dirhams towards repairing infrastructure, including roads and hydro-agricultural networks. Floods caused by weeks of torrential rain and dam releases have displaced 188,000 people and submerged 110,000 hectares of farmland. The hardest hit areas have been declared disaster zones. In addition to infrastructure repairs, the funds will support rehousing efforts, reconstruction and aid for small businesses and farmers. Meanwhile, Moroccan authorities, backed by the army, have set up evacuation camps and are using helicopters and rescue boats to assist affected communities. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.